Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk with you all. I also appreciate the invitation to be here with you. I'm really excited to talk with you about the research and engagement that the Census Bureau has conducted over the past decade and a half to improve our data on race and ethnicity, as well as how the 2020 census results show us the persisting problems with the two separate questions approach for race and ethnicity statistics. So a little bit of background information, the decennial census, like all federal information collections, must follow standards established by the U.S. Office of Management and Budget, or the OMB, when collecting race and ethnicity data. The OMB requires two minimum categories for data on ethnicity, and those categories are Hispanic or Latino and not Hispanic or Latino. And it requires 5 minimum categories for race. They're American Indian or Alaska Native, Asian, Black or African American, Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander, and white. And people, of course, can report multiple races. Additionally, the Census Bureau is also required by Congress to use the category some other race on the decennial census and the American Community Survey. While the original 1977 OMB standards were revised only 2 decades later in 1997, results from the 2000 census showed us that many respondents were still having problems answering the two separate questions on race and ethnicity. These concerns were a major impetus for the research the Census Bureau undertook to improve race and ethnicity questions by testing several design strategies with 2 national groundbreaking scientific studies and multiple qualitative and quantitative studies over the past few years. Notably, with the 2010 Alternative Questionnaire Experiment, also known as the AQE, and the 2015 National Content Test, or the NCT. Over the past 40 years, the decennial census has seen increasing responses to the some other race category, which is meant to be a small residual category. Upwards of 50 million people have chosen not to answer the race question, or they did not identify with any of the official race categories in the census and instead reported identities which are ultimately classified as some other race. In 2007, to address these concerns, the Census Bureau, in consultation with OMB, started developing research plans to identify strategies for improving race and Hispanic origin reporting and to increase the accuracy and reliability of these data. The 2010 Race and Hispanic Origin Alternative Questionnaire Experiment was undertaken to test combining the Hispanic origin and race questions into a combined question. The AQE was the basis for testing as we move forward to the 2020 census. From our empirical research and outreach over the past decade and a half, we know that the current race and ethnicity question design is problematic. We started exploring new ways how to improve these questions and how they could better align with the ways in which people identify their quote race and quote ethnicity. This slide highlights 2 examples of question format designs that we started testing in our 2010 Alternative Questionnaire Experiment research. On the left is the separate questions approach, similar to what we used in the 2010 census, with the first question asking all respondents if they were Hispanic or Latino or not Hispanic or Latino, and then posing a second question asking all respondents to report their race. The image on the right presents a combined question approach that we used in the 2010 AQE, where all of the race and ethnicity categories were combined into one design, and respondents were asked to report their race and or ethnicity. So let's keep these basic conceptual comparisons in mind, 2 separate questions versus 1 combined question as we talk about our continuation of this research. The AQE research identified several promising ways to improve our race and ethnicity questions so they better measure our nation. After the release of the AQE report in the summer of 2012, we were very active in reaching out to stakeholders to make them aware of the research, to discuss these findings, and also to hear their feedback. We learned from our qualitative research and ongoing conversations with stakeholders across the country about our research designs and findings that many Americans view race and ethnicity differently than in past decades. Building upon the foundation and successful strategies of the 2010 AQE, we focus on 3 major goals in our research to improve race and ethnicity data to address the reporting issues and community concerns. 1, to increase the accuracy and reliability of reporting in major race and ethnicity categories. The second was lowering item non-response rates. And the third was collecting detailed data for myriad groups. Coinciding with this extensive research, the Census Bureau continued ongoing engagement and discussions about race and ethnicity with OMB, federal statistical agencies, and also additional stakeholder groups. Throughout the decade, our research team reached out to stakeholders to make them aware of our plans for the upcoming 2015 National Content Test and to obtain their feedback about our research plans. So building upon the AQE, we continued our research into the evaluation of a separate questions approach and a combined question approach leading up to the 2015 National Content Test. And we fielded this test in the summer and fall of 2015. It was the largest research test ever undertaken at the Census Bureau. It employed a nationally representative sample of approximately 1.2 million households across the country, and it included Puerto Rico. The sample design for the NCT included oversampling of key population groups, such as Asians and Pacific Islanders, Middle Easterners and North African populations, Black or African American population, Hispanics, and American Indian and Alaska Native populations. We connected the 2010 AQE research to the 2015 NCT goals and objectives for improving data on race and ethnicity. This test also included a re-interview operation to further assess the accuracy of the question alternatives. And we were very pleased with the overall response rate, which was 52%, which is really good for a mid-decade survey. And the goal of the research was to inform recommendations to OMB and federal interagency colleagues on the question design format for the 2020 census and potential revisions to the OMB standards. The key dimension was testing question format, where we continued to research the separate questions approach and combined question approaches. This slide shows just 3 of the examples of question formats that we tested on paper instruments in the 2015 NCT. To introduce you to the question format comparisons, on this slide, I have 3 conceptual examples of the different formats we tested. On the left, highlighted in blue, is what we call the separate questions approach. And like I just mentioned before, this is very similar to the 2010 census with a separate question for Hispanic origin and a separate question for race. In red is the combined question with write-ins approach. This is similar to what we tested in 2010 AQE, where we combine race and Hispanic origin into one question, and we use dedicated write-in areas to elicit detailed responses for each major category. And then finally, on the far right of the screen, highlighted in green, is the combined question with detailed checkboxes approach. This was new for the NCT, and it combined race and Hispanic origin into one question. But here we used multiple detailed checkboxes in addition to write-in areas to elicit detailed responses. So I'll talk a little bit about the results from the NCT. And this first slide shows the race and ethnicity distribution by question format. But first, before I get into it, I want to talk a little bit about how these data are displayed. The colors connect back to the question designs that I just showed you. So the blue bars are for the separate question designs. The red are for the combined question with the write-in areas, and the green is for the combined question with those detailed checkboxes. 95% confidence intervals are depicted by the vertical black lines at the top of each bar. And these data show the alone or in combination groups, so they do add to a little bit more than 100% of the population because people can report multiple race responses. So what we found is that the sum of the race frequency is lower in combined question formats than in separate question formats. And the white frequency is lower in combined question formats than in separate question formats. We found that the white population dropped to levels reflecting the non-Hispanic white population that we see in traditional separate question approaches. And overall, when a Hispanic category is provided as a response option with the combined question, some of the race becomes one of the smallest response categories, demonstrating that a combined question approach is more in line with how Hispanic respondents actually view themselves. And both of these results were in line with the 2010 AQE findings. So next I have the distribution in a little bit different way with the non-Hispanic race distribution in the middle and the Hispanic distribution split into 3 categories: Hispanic alone, Hispanic plus some other race, and Hispanic plus another major race group. And the results show that the differences between separate and combined seen here is in part due to how Hispanic responses are edited. But we believe that they're mainly due to how Hispanics are finding themselves in the combined question. In a combined format, many Hispanics or Latinos, They really just want to tell us that they're Hispanic and they're not anything else. The non-Hispanic groups have similar levels of reporting regardless of the question format, particularly for non-Hispanic whites and non-Hispanic Blacks. Again, this finding was consistent with what we learned in the 2010 AQE. So next we look at, for people who reported as Hispanic, what was their race distribution? We saw that most Hispanics reported only a Hispanic response in the combined question. In fact, roughly 70% of Hispanic respondents on the combined question reported that they were just Hispanic. And there are large differences in some of the race alone and the two or more races category. And this is in part due to differences in how Hispanic responses are coded in editing, but it's also mainly due to the way Hispanics answer the separate race question. For people who want to report that they're just Hispanic or Latino, many struggle with how to answer the race question. Some are doing so in the sum of the race write-in field, while some will check the white checkbox category, but again, say that they're Hispanic in that write-in field. Another key finding is that there's no difference among the question formats for Hispanics who identify as Black or any of the other race categories. This was a concern that came up during the AQB. When the results were released, we heard from many Afro-Latinos that they thought Afro-Latinos would not report that they are both Black and Hispanic at the same rate in a combined question format, and we did not see that in the results. So in summary, our findings showed that the combined question with the detailed checkboxes design appeared to elicit higher quality data on race and ethnicity, and these findings were in line with the results from the 2010 AQE. We found that a combined question with detailed checkboxes design showed that the white population dropped to levels reflecting the non-Hispanic white population that we see in traditional separate question approaches. This resulted in a decrease in the sum of the race reporting. It also resulted in lower item non-response rate than the separate question approach. And this format also produced the same or higher levels of detailed reporting. And there was higher overall consistency in reporting for Hispanics. Another design element we tested in the 2015 NCT was the inclusion of a distinct Middle Eastern and North African response category. So in preparation for the NCT, we had to determine which groups would be included in the MENA category for the purposes of this test. So to do so, 15 organizations were identified that had published classifications of the MENA region of the world. And these organizations included research centers, universities, non-governmental organizations, and other US federal agencies. After looking at these classifications, we determined which countries were in the majority of these classifications, and the nationalities and ethnicities with origins in these countries were included in the working classification. In the NCT, we examined the self-response reporting patterns by the inclusion of a MENA category. And in this graphic, the light orange bars represent the question designs that did not have a distinct MENA category, and the dark orange bars represent designs that did include a distinct MENA category. What we found was that many people of Middle Eastern and North African background, about 80%, used the MENA category when it was available. When there was no MENA category present, a MENA response was usually reported in the white category, about 85% of the time. We also found that reporting a MENA response in some of the race category is significantly reduced, from 11.5% when no MENA category is included to 3.3% with the inclusion of a distinct MENA category. In this graphic, we show where detailed responses that were included in the classification of MENA were reported by the presence of a MENA category. The detailed groups included in this graph are included as either detailed checkboxes or examples in the various questionnaire designs when a MENA category was included. So on the left, we show where detailed responses were reported when there was no MENA category included. What you see is groups like Lebanese and Moroccan most frequently reported in the white category, which is represented by the pink bar when there's no MENA category. On the right, I show where detailed responses were reported when a MENA category was included. And what you see is that when a MENA category is available, the detailed groups shown report in the MENA category, represented by the orange. Leading up to this research, we heard from stakeholders that there were some groups not in our working classification that may also identify as MENA. In the 2015 NCT, we oversampled for these additional groups. such as Armenian, Sudanese, Somali, Afghan, and others to see how they would report. And this graphic shows how those groups not in the MENA working classification reported their detailed ethnicities by the presence of a MENA category. What you see is that detailed groups in this graphic that were recommended to us, but were not in our MENA classification, generally did not report in the MENA category. So on the left, what you see is that these groups, generally they reported in the white category or the Black category when there was no MENA category. And when there was a MENA category, overall, the majority of them still typically reported in the white category or the Black or African American category. So the major takeaway from this finding was that even when the MENA category is available, these detailed groups generally do not use the MENA category. In summary, our research showed that the use of the distinct Middle Eastern and North African category appeared to elicit higher quality data for people who identify as Middle Eastern and North African. Specifically, people who identify as MENA use the MENA category when it's available. And people who are MENA have trouble identifying as only Middle Eastern and North African when no category is available. The nationalities and ethnicities in the 2015 NCT working classification of MENA identified as MENA when the category was available. And those nationalities and ethnicities in the MENA oversample, but not in our classification, did not identify as MENA when the MENA category was available. This research showed us how much we could improve data on race and ethnicity and why it was so encouraging for yielding better information about our diverse country. The NCT research demonstrated optimal design elements for improving race and ethnicity data in the decennial census. And this slide presents how all of these elements come together in one design. First, the combined question with detailed checkboxes design supported the research objectives of increasing reporting within the current standard O&B categories by decreasing item non-response, improving accuracy and reliability, and achieving similar or higher levels of detailed reporting for all major groups, including for Hispanics. The results of this research also indicated that it's optimal to use a dedicated Middle Eastern or North African response category. With this approach, MENA responses can be tabulated with the white category or tabulated separately, depending upon the decision made by O&B. Under the current O&B standards on race and ethnicity, MENA responses are aggregated to the white category. O&B is currently conducting a review of these standards, which I'll talk a little bit about in a minute. It will ultimately be O&B's decision as to whether or not MENA will become a new minimum reporting category that's distinct from the white category. The results of the NCT research also indicated that it's optimal to use the new instructions to select all boxes that apply in conjunction with the terminology race or ethnicity in the question scene. And we see all these elements together in this question design. However, our research didn't stop there, and we continued as we prepared for the 2020 census. With the use of the 2017 census test, we continued to refine the design of the combined question format and collect detailed responses for the American Indian and Alaska Native groups and detailed responses for Middle Eastern and North African groups. Based on our findings from the 2015 National Content Test, we revised the instructions and design of the American Indian and Alaska Native category, which showed that a write-in only rather than 3 conceptual checkboxes elicited more detailed data from American Indian and Alaska Native responses. Additionally, based on results from the 2015 NCT and feedback from some of our key stakeholders and experts that we work with, the detailed checkboxes and examples in the MENA category were modified for the 2017 census test. These modifications were made to clarify that the category included those with roots or heritage from diverse nations, ethnicities, and transnational groups across the Middle East and North Africa, and it includes individuals who are both Arab and those who are also not Arab. Although we were not able to use a combined question for the 2020 census, we made several positive improvements for the 2020 census questions within the framework of the current 1997 O&B standards by providing dedicated write-in areas and examples for each major category. And we substantially enhanced our race and ethnicity code list to reflect the myriad responses people report. These improvements allowed people to more accurately report their detailed racial and ethnic identities as they sharpened our collection, coding, and tabulation of disaggregated racial and ethnic groups. And this was critical because people reported more detailed identities than ever before. In 2010, we processed about 55 million write-in responses, and this rose to 350 million for the race and Hispanic origin questions in the 2020 census. However, even with these improvements, the 2020 census results show the fundamental problem with the two separate questions design. The trouble respondents have with the separate question design continues. In fact, these issues have gotten worse, and we see them very clearly in the results of the 2020 census. On the left, the results from the 2015 NCT are shown, and on the right, the results from the 2020 census are shown. Using the separate questions format in the 2020 census resulted in reporting patterns that are even more pronounced than what we saw in our research this past decade. But we're not surprised by these results because our research predicted that this would happen. This slide shows the Hispanic population by race for the 2020 census. The improvements we made for the 2020 questions within the framework of the 1997 OMB standards by providing dedicated write-in areas and examples for each major category allowed people to more accurately report their detailed racial and ethnic identities. The number of people of Hispanic origin who identified as white alone decreased by 52.9%, down from 26.7 million to 12.6 million over the past 10 years. And between 2010 and 2020, the number of people of Hispanic origin reporting more than one race increased from 3 million to 20.3 million, a 567% change. But it's important to note that these comparisons between the 2020 census and the 2010 census should be made with caution, taking into account the changes that we made to our Hispanic origin race questions, our processing, and the ways that we code what people tell us. The sum of the race category on the decennial census is not the problem, and it's not the cause for the issues that people have with reporting their identities. Instead, the sum of the race category spotlights the problem with the two separate questions format. The intent of the sum of the race category is really to be a residual category for people who don't identify with any of the minimum OMB race categories. However, in the 2020 census, 49.9 million people identified with some other race, surpassing the Black or African American population as the second largest race group. When the residual category is the second largest race group, changes need to be made. And we have identified a solution with the combined question. As social scientists, we recognize that race and ethnicity are fluid constructs that change over time as they're influenced by political, social, and economic factors. And we're confident that differences in overall racial distributions seen in the 2020 census are largely due to the improvements in the design of the two separate questions for race data collection and processing, as well as some demographic changes over the past 10 years. And I do want to stress that we're also confident, as shown in the research that our team has conducted over the past decade, that using a single combined question for race and ethnicity in the decennial census ultimately would yield an even more accurate portrait of how the US population self-identifies, especially for people who self-identify as multiracial or multi-ethnic. So where does this leave us? Well, I'm very excited to share with you that OMB has convened an interagency technical working group to review the 1997 OMB standards. Our team knows that it's critical that our statistics represent how people identify their complex racial and ethnic identities in the 21st century. Decades worth of research and countless dialogues with multitudes of stakeholders have helped get us to where we are today. Extensive research and outreach over this past decade with two groundbreaking national studies, the 2010 AQE and the 2015 National Content Test, have informed the discussions on how we can improve the decennial census collection of race and ethnicity information. The research findings I share with you showed that a combined race and ethnicity question with multiple detailed checkboxes and a dedicated Middle Eastern and North African category is the optimal design for improving race and ethnicity data in the decennial census. We also know that determining decennial census content is an extensive undertaking. It involves research, external partner engagement, and of course, approval from the US Office of Management and Budget and the US Congress. So earlier this year, in June, the Chief Statistician of the United States, Dr. Karen Orvis announced that her office is beginning a formal review to revise OMB's Statistical Policy Directive number 15, which are the standards for maintaining, collecting, and presenting federal data on race and ethnicity. Those are the standards that I mentioned at the very beginning of this presentation. Directive number 15 provides minimum standards that ensure our ability to compare information and data across federal agencies, and also to understand how well federal programs serve a diverse America. In addition, the current standards encourage further disaggregation in the collection, tabulation, and reporting of data when it's useful to do so. And you can follow the link on this slide to read the blog from June for more information on that. So I'll provide an overview of how this review and the revision process is going to work. So the first thing Dr. Orvis did was convene an interagency technical working group with staff from over 20 federal agencies participating. And only career staff are part of this working group. There are no political appointees involved at all. And OMB is the chair of this technical working group, and the Census Bureau serves as the co-chair. So what will the interagency technical working group be doing? The Interagency Technical Working Group will evaluate relevant research, engage with the public and affected agencies to develop recommendations for the chief statistician on how to improve the race and ethnicity standards. And after the Interagency Technical Working Group delivers recommendations to the chief statistician, Dr. Orvis will go through her own decision-making process. Dr. Orvis will consider the working group recommendations along with public input, and then deliver her own recommendations to OMB leadership. The goal is to have any revisions to the race and ethnicity standards publicly announced no later than the summer of 2024. Public input is an important part of the review of the 1997 race and ethnicity standards, and there are several ways that the public can be involved. So first, the Interagency Technical Working Group through OMB will seek public input on initial proposals for changing the race and ethnicity standards. This will be done through a Federal Register notice, and the idea is for the Interagency Technical Working Group to publicly share their initial thoughts on how the race and ethnicity standards should change, and then they'll let the public react to it. Then the working group will review and analyze all of the public comments as they develop their final recommendations on how to change the race and ethnicity standards. Next, the Interagency Technical Working Group will be holding virtual listening sessions every other week to give members of the public the opportunity to share their views and perspectives. And these sessions began in September 2022, and I believe they're continuing all throughout next year. Third, for questions about the process to review and revise the race and ethnicity standards, or if you would like to be notified about the FRN when it comes out, when it will contain the initial proposals, is published, or if you want to be part of a listening session, you can contact OMB directly. So I really hope you will consider participating in the review and revision of the 1997 OMB race and ethnicity standards by providing your input, especially after hearing about all of the research that Census Bureau has conducted today. So that concludes my presentation today. We're all in this together, and I really appreciate this incredible opportunity to advance data for the future of our nation. We really look forward to your questions, and I really want to thank the organizers for inviting me today.